What's going on, everyone? It's Live Well Check. Today, I decided I was going to record a video because it's cold outside. I know I'm wearing some Seattle Mariner gear. I'm not from Washington. I'm not from Seattle. Actually, born and raised in Ohio. But I grew up in the 90s, and if anybody's familiar with the Seattle Mariners in the 90s, they were the coolest team ever. Plus, the green right here, like that teal green, my favorite color of all time. So, regardless, being here in northern Ohio, today was a high of the past probably month and a half at 39 degrees. It's cold. There's ice forming on ponds, reservoirs, lakes, some rivers and creeks. Pretty much open, but it is cold. The bite has completely slowed down, and a lot of your fish are now pushed out over deep water suspended. I don't have access to a boat at the time right now, and a lot of people that have boats, a lot of times are already winterized. It's January, so a lot of people aren't doing any fishing unless they're trying to ice fish. And we're at this weird spot where you can't really ice fish because the ice isn't really there, or it's not thick enough, or we have these days like today where it's 39 degrees and it really hasn't been cold enough to get thick. So it's risky to go out. But regardless, in celebration of cold water baits and bait classifications, I decided I was going to talk about a couple of stories that I have specifically with the baits in this box that I have right here. And I'm not a professional on these. I do know enough. I do know a good amount. I have some different models. I have some different colors, some really old school stuff, and some newer stuff. We're going to be talking about the one and only famous cold water jerkbait. The jerkbait is absolutely known to catch fish in any condition, any clarity of water. Typically, it's going to be a little bit clearer water. But the jerkbait is really, really known for being a cold water bait. It's erratic. It can be fished fairly slowly. It elicits strikes when fish are aggressive and when they're not aggressive. This one right here is a Smithwick, like a medium. If you look at the color, it's translucent. It's like an olive back. A lot of times it's, I think it's called IU shad, or olive herring. You know, there's a few different uh, color classifications for these. It's a really, really good color. If you look at it, it's a beautiful color. Very sharp, sticky hooks. Very, very sharp, sticky hooks. Fish looks at these hooks and they're done for. Now, Smithwick has always made a lot of really, really popular jerk baits, and I know that everybody talks about the Vision 110, right? The Berkeley Stunna, and a few other ones that are out right now. Personally, I'm probably not going to buy a jerk bait for 15 to 25 bucks. I just won't. They produce. They really do. And I will use some of these designs that you see, the difference between that and this one's got some life on it. Very old school. Look at that, missing paint. This is a Thunder Stick, a Storm Thunder Stick. This is one of the originals. Very old. I had this when I was growing up. This has caught a lot of fish. But if you look at the design right away, outside of the bill size, right, we do have a difference in the bill size. If you notice that, that's obvious. One's going to be a little bit deeper than the other. But what I'm talking about is the bill design. This is extremely thin. This one is thick, real thick. I mean, I'm not worried about doing that with this one, even though this is over 30 years old. But if I do that hard enough with this one, not saying it'll break, that they're fragile, but look at it. Let's be honest. The action comes from a lot of different things. Every jerkbait is going to be weighted a little bit differently. The internal structure, the rattles, both of these rattle. I'll try to hold all the components so you can kind of hear. That's more of a one knocker, more of a thud, and a little bit different, little higher pitch. Similar one knocker. You can actually see the components in this one. It's not specifically a one knocker, but it does kind of have that sound. Look at the body type. Look at the body type, right? Look at the top. Sorry, they keep sticking to my fingers because they're so sharp. Look at the body type, right? They're about the same exact size, about the same length. But when you look at it, this one's slimmer. Your Smithwick is slimmer than your Thunderstick when you really look at them. And that's where the difference in action comes from. Yes, the weight, the bill, everything is going to change it, but that body, this has more of a dull movement. It's kind of, when it dives, it slides a little bit, where this will dart more. I've always liked the action of a Thunderstick, or I have another one in here. This one I have a specific story on. This is a bomber suspending long A, and look at your body type. Very similar, right? Yes, the bill is the same size, but if you even take, here's another Smithwick. You guys know that sound. If you've ever tried to get a crankbait or a jerkbait out of a tackle box, you know that sound. But look at it. This is a little bit smaller of a bill, but it's that bill design, right? Sorry, I've got visitors. Get out of here. We adopted a fox, basically. It's a wild cat. He's a good boy, but regardless, let's take a look at this, right? The depth isn't going to be much different. This will actually get down to almost 8 to 12 foot, depending on the line size that you have. And you can see I have used it, right? I cut that off. This one doesn't have a line tie on it, but these are both going to get down to about the 8 to 12 mark. I fish a lot of my jerkbaits. I like to fish on 12-pound test or 10-pound test. I don't like to go a lot smaller than that. These are heavy crank or jerkbaits. These are heavy jerkbaits. And listen to the difference, right? Not as much of a one knocker as the other one. That's 2 Smithwicks right there. But listen to this one. Kind of like a maraca in the water. I grabbed these. Got a really good deal on these. I bought like 6. I got 3 of each color. So I have the other color right here. Translucent, right? I don't like a really bright jerkbait very often. You're not going to fish them in too dirty a water. I'm not saying that you shouldn't. I think a lot of the rules that are out about any sort of lure or a reason that a fish should do a certain thing or not. I shared a boat with a guy one time, and he said, man, you'd really think that a fish would come up and hit this, or, you know, hit that, hit this. Why aren't they hitting this? They must have not read the same book as us. You know, that's kind of the thing that you have to think about once in a while when you're out there fishing, is that fish are reacting to their environment, and there are rules of thumb to go by, and it'll keep you on the right direction a lot, no matter if you're using worms like in another video I have, or jerkbaits. You could use this in crystal clear water when the sun's out, and it could be the top thing going. Now, every rule that we've ever been known to research or to act on as far as chasing bass would tell you that that's really not the conditions you want. You want a little wind, you want a little dinge or stain or color in the water, but not too much. The fish don't read that book. We know these rules of thumb because that's the way that we've all went out there and we've seen things happen the way that they happen on the water, but it doesn't mean that this is going to produce better in a very clear, still water when this should over this. We just don't know. So try it at any given point in time. But the main thing is that these are what I call them sharp. They're sharper, and the movements are sharper. They're more direct. They're all erratic. They're all erratic, but they're sharper. They dart more. They turn, and that's what you want. These are a little more dull, but they get bites. Very dull. The thunder stick, anybody who's ever thrown a jerkbait knows what a thunder stick is. There's a reason. They catch a lot of fish. So, I have 2 stories about jerkbaits. I'm going to show you a couple more too, because I have some deep divers. So you have a bill like this one that I showed you. I think this one can get down 12, 14 on the right line size. You probably imagine, typically on the back it'll tell you, but 10-pound test is about what they usually go on. That beautiful sound. There's a deep diver. A little smaller body style. But that's a real deep diver for a jerkbait. That's almost one that you'd want to crank down a good ways and then work. Bleeding Bait series. Old school. This is Rapala. Rapala always had sharp or more thin, direct style bodies on their jerkbaits. I think this is another deep diver, but it's a different body style. Once again, about the same size. So these 2 jerkbaits here, I keep dropping stuff. They're literally sticking to my hands because these hooks are sharp. Even on these old school ones, the points are still there. They're literally sticking into my skin. You can see that body style just a little bit different, right? Just a little bit different. This is more rounded. That bill, this will probably get down even a little bit deeper. That's like a spoon bill, right? They're going to get down about the same depth, but look at that body. It doesn't look like a major difference, but that difference is just enough where this action is going to be more direct, erratic, sharp movements, boom, boom. Where this is going to be, it's going to roll more. It'll turn, but it won't turn on itself real quick. Like these can turn on themselves really quick, which can elicit some strikes. But this can be really, really good compared to this in certain circumstances because of the dull movement. Because it doesn't quite dart as bad. It will roll. It'll swim. It'll wobble. And sometimes that's the deal, right? And I'm not a professional jerkbait fisherman. I've caught my fair share. It's one of the first baits I actually got confidence in. And it was none of the ones I've shown you so far. But I'm going to put a few of these away. I do have a special guest jerkbait. 2 of them. Both of my grandfathers fished for largemouth and smallmouth bass. Like I said in other videos, is that one of them would always chase bass on one lake. He had his own bass boat, and my other grandfather, he fished tournaments. Fished Redman back in the day, which would be like your Trilene series or your BFLs now. Redman back in the day. Had some local sponsors and stuff like that. He did okay. He was a good fisherman. But my grandfather that owned a boat on my dad's side, he made this. Not sure how. I remember he'd be out in the shed, and these are wood. Eyes are glued on them. It's got a metal bill. It's really cool. I've never really had the guts to use one. I have 2 or 3 of them. He's passed. He made these a long time ago. That's almost like a blade for a spinnerbait. I'm not sure how he did it, but that's really cool. That's an honorable mention. And then out of my grandfather's tackle box that fished the Redman is, you don't see a lot of these. He used snap swivels a lot, which snap swivels, if you use light enough ones, they allow it to kind of move a little bit more, or you can do a loop knot. Loop knots can be tricky. But this is the old Rebel sinking minnow. Rebel sinking minnow. That's a classic, classic, classic jerkbait. I'd like to get my hands on some more of these from the old school, but I have two of them here. I don't have the guts to throw those either. But these are cool, cool baits when it's really cold and they sink extremely slowly. There are some modifications you can make to some baits. Some of the biggest bass that I've ever caught have been on these smaller jerk baits that I'm going to show you. This is just an old school Rebel. Does have a suspend strip on it, and that's just to help it from float, because these are very, very buoyant, and they're not really expensive, but they can catch you some fish for sure. But I had another bait like this. It was more of a minnow color. This is a perch color, obviously, or like a fire perch. It was more of a minnow color, had a black and green back, and it was all translucent on the side. It was the same exact model, just a different color. It's broken now, but I caught close to a 6-pound largemouth really, really late in the season on a man-made reservoir, and that was really cool. I just went out. It was about getting to the point where I knew I wasn't going to be able to fish much from bank anymore, and I went out and I had some jerk baits, a jig and stuff tied on. I hadn't really caught anything all day, and I came across a spot where there was some current, and I could see a bunch of bait fish, and I would throw this down there, and as I was jerking it, I could about hook myself. As I was jerking it, I would feel the weight, and it was shad getting hung up on the hooks. And probably about the sixth or seventh cast, I tried to reel it down below them. So because what I was doing is I would run into a shad right away, and it would foil up my cast, right, and then my jerk bait's like rolling and doing all sorts of stuff. So I reeled it down a little bit. I jerked it a little bit, and I seen the line go down, and it's not a sinking, it's very slowly. In cold water they tend to float a little slower, but it would slowly rise, it would float, and the line kind of had a bow in it like this, and I reeled down real quick and I felt some pressure, so I leaned into it, and it was almost a 6-pound largemouth. It was awesome. And that was jerk bait, extremely cold. Water temperature was maybe 34 degrees just before ice started going on the reservoir. So there's some things that you can do with these. Suspend strips. I did that around that same time because I didn't want it to float up as fast. I wanted it to slowly float up or almost suspend. So I put some suspend strips or dots. Some people modify them. You can actually drill holes in them and put epoxy or small split shots. A lot of stuff you can do. And also there's some really tiny jerk baits. Really tiny. They will catch bass, mainly for like your crappie, bluegill, stuff like that. But one of my favorite jerk baits, and the one that I learned how to bass fish with, and it wasn't a traditional jerk pause or anything like that. OG, absolutely the original husky jerk. I don't know if you can read it. It's old, dingy, but man, this bait, and these are very buoyant. They're very hard to cast. You can't really use them on bait casting equipment. I don't think I was using it on spinning rod, but I had like the old Daiwa push button, 10-pound test. And what we were doing this one spring is there's sandbars all over the lake, and these sandbars would come up out of 20, 30 foot, and then get between 3 and 6 foot on top, and they were just sand runs in this like glacial lake, and it didn't have much grass or anything. It was early in the spring, and you could see seagulls dive bombing out there, right? So there's bait fish and different stuff out there. Almost caught a seagull this trip that I was fishing. It dive bombed my husky jerk, and right before it hit the water, I had to jerk the lure, because when you reel it, if you'd reel it at a steady clip, they would actually see it, and if they were trying to dive bomb this, they would get it. So you had to almost wait until they were close to the water and crank up real quick and then jerk it, to try to keep the seagulls from eating your jerk bait, which would be a mess, right? Um, so what we were doing with this particular day, and it was chilly, really windy. It was your typical jerkbait weather, right? Little overcast, it was windy, very clear water, early spring, colder water. I'd say the water temperature, if I had to guess, and I was a kid, I would say it was probably mid 40s, high 40s. But what we were doing is we were out there trying to get the pre-spawners and ones that were come up sunning, looking for crawdads, something to eat, coming out of the depths, getting up on top of structure, ready to eat. And we were taking these, and I was really young, and I couldn't work the jerkbait. Since I was a kid, and I couldn't work it and jerk it, right? Is I would just crank it down and then pull it. And I know that that's kind of a technique, but these guys were cracking up because I was catching just as many fish as them. My grandfather and this other gentleman, they were out pre-fishing weeks before a tournament. Also, little sneaky, red hook on the front, red hook on the front. If you don't know, now you know. If you have a red hook, some people put feathered hooks even on the back of these, but a red hook on the front, if that fish hones in on that red hook, chances are it's going to get more of the bait, more hooks in the fish. So I'm not a big jerkbait fisherman, but I do know how to put myself in a successful position. But yeah, so I would crank this thing down, and it would swim. And these are very buoyant, and I didn't have any suspend strips or anything on them. But I would crank it down, and then after I would crank, I would just pull it, and I would kind of like this, and then I would reel back to it. And by about the second or third sweep, so you got to think, that jerkbait's coming down. It's not really darting. It was just swimming down. It would get down probably 2 foot, and then as I was pulling, I would just kind of twitch my rod, almost like I was fishing a football head jig or something. As it would just kind of do this a little bit, and it's very erratic. But I wasn't pulling it hard enough to make it erratic. It was just almost wide swimming and then doing something like that, and then as I would reel back towards the bait, it would float up a little bit, and I would do it again. And about between the second and third pull, wham! I mean, I'm talking slamming it. And it was good largemouth and smallmouth. This lake is very mixed. And I could catch a smallmouth or have one on, and even if it got off, and then by the next cast or two, I'd hook up on a largemouth. And I don't remember us catching any tanks or anything giant that day, but we caught quite a few fish, and it was a lot of fun. And that gave me a whole confidence in this. I was at a lake that's very difficult to fish, and I was out there catching them on this husky jerk, and it was a beautiful thing. And sometimes the jerk is the deal. Sometimes it's location, color. I think I used 3 different colors that day. I was a young kid, so I'm like, oh, they're not biting anymore. I'll change colors, which is kind of a tactic, but I don't think it really mattered. But the majority of the fish I caught was on this one and my very favorite color, the rainbow trout. I used this because I thought it looked the most realistic. And back then, I mean, it did. If you look at, the difference between them, you look at it. So I mainly used this one, and I caught quite a few fish on that. So that was kind of my husky jerk story. and how I became infatuated with the Husky jerk. And you can see that thing's been through war. This is over 30 years old. I mean, I'm I'm in my 40s, and I used this before I was in the double digits. So, and this was in the tackle box. This was not brand new. These are brand new hooks now. Triple grip, mustads, short shank KVD, 2X. Very, very sharp hooks. Stay up to date. I still use these once in a while. Not a lot. Um, but yeah. Sometimes it's a very erratic, hard jerk, and sometimes it's not. Um, so another story I have about how different and in between. When we think we know everything we know about jerk baits, we don't, right? This bomber, it was this exact bait. I had one of the first tournaments I ever fished. It was the very first tournament I ever fished out of my own John boat. I had it converted, had a little deck on it, had a live well, cooler, and I was fishing against, it was like 14 other dudes. Actually, it was a team tournament. Um, I had just got the boat, and I didn't feel like it was stable enough for me and another guy, so I just fished by myself. And it was at a man-made reservoir, and it's basically a big rock bowl. No smallmouth. It's all largemouth, but the largemouth think that they're smallmouth because they're just open water feeders. It's all rocks. There's really no grass. There's nowhere to hide. They eat a lot of minnows and a lot of crawdads, so they fight and act like smallmouth. So they're kind of like a spotted bass, right? It's a largemouth, smallmouth mix. It's in between. These reservoirs up here, these big rock bowls, that's the attitude that the largemouth have. And they suspend a lot because they don't have cover. They don't have a lot of structure to hang around. So when I was driving to this tournament, there was frost on the ground. It was cold. And I had a feeling that I would use a football head jig and a jerkbait. I had an idea what I was going to do, where I was going to fish. I just said, I'm going to lock this jerkbait in my hand. And so I put it on, had it on 10-pound test. These are heavy jerkbaits, so you can throw them a mile. And I was fishing around. I was fishing, it would be the west side of the reservoir. There was a little bit of flats that come up. They're spawning flats. They make them intentionally so that it promotes some spawning and bed making for the largemouth and bluegill and stuff in there. And what I did is I went to the west side and said, I'm just going to start in the one corner. I just have a trolling motor. It's electric motor only. This club that I fished, it was electric motor only. And I'll just start heading north. So I'll be in the southwest corner, and I'll just head north along that drop, and I'll just start throwing a jerk bait and throwing a football head jig. So I got down the corner, and I could see some arches on my fish finder. This was, I don't know, probably 9 years ago now. I seen some arches on my fish finder, and I had a feeling, well, you could tell fish were suspended. Time of year, it's early in the day. It was extremely cold, and it was windy and overcast. Not really raining, but it was like it would spit just a little bit of mist just here and there, but you couldn't even really see it dropping on the water with all the wind. You could just kind of feel it once in a while. The wind would blow, you just kind of feel your face get wet, and it was just nasty. So I took this, I threw it out a few times. I said, "Man, this got to be the deal." And I'm kind of nervous. I'm out there in my own John boat, thinking I got these other guys, and um, I need to produce some fish. And we were kind of close to my home, and I grew up fishing here on bank, so I knew these guys would be thinking gunning for me a little bit because they had mentioned it, at the meeting before the tournament. um they're like, oh, this is home water, you can't come out and do terrible on your home water. And it was going to be a tough day of fishing. I knew that. And I'm like, yeah. And I didn't really know how the fish were acting. I didn't get a chance to go there besides about maybe 2 weeks prior. So, the conditions fit. I did have this one on, and I threw it out. I jerked it. And what I like to do and what I was taught to do as a kid, when you're fishing a jerkbait. Now, when I told you about that reel down and sweep thing, I did that out of necessity because I could not jerk and keep up with the bait, and it was floating too fast. So I wanted to keep it down. So I was mainly reeling and sweeping. So I really wasn't doing that intentionally. I was doing that because I had to fish that way. Because I was young, I was making long casts, the bait I was using, the equipment I had, and that's just what I had to do. Well, now using a bait caster, using an appropriate rod for any sort of jerk bait I would want to throw, what I know you're supposed to do is, if you feel like very hard jerks with a few pauses in between is the deal, then start off with that. They say pick out a beat of a song in your head, right? So I did that. It was like a POD, Youth of the Nation, do 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 do. So I was doing that, boom 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 boom, and I would reel towards, and I would stop, boom 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 boom, reel towards, boom 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 boom, reel towards, and they say that that's one of the easiest ways to kind of lock a pattern in your head, right? You pick a beat out. So mine was a lot of jerks, a lot of erraticism, and then a pause. And I was pausing for maybe 2-3 seconds. I made a couple casts. I felt like I was getting the bait down to the right depth. I was over about 14 to 16 foot of water, and I was getting the bait down to about 8. Right? So I knew if I was fishing just underneath them, they'll nose down and get it. And if you're just over them, they'll nose up and get it. So I felt like I was in the right area, the right depth. I had marks on my fish finder. And then I decided, well, I'll just do something slow. Right? So I would just do a jerk jerk. So it would be bump, 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 bump. Just it was really slow, methodical. The pause was about 3 to 5 seconds. It was twice as long, but it wasn't very long. And about the fourth cast, and I'm bombing this thing out there. So these casts are taking a while to get in. So I bomb this thing out there, and a gust of wind starts pushing me towards the shore. Now, I've already kind of reeled it down, and I gave it a few jerks, do 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 do, and I reeled, do 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 do, and then this gust of wind starts blowing me towards the bank. So I take my trolling motor and I go to kick it out like this, and as I'm kicking it out, I feel boom. Now, that isn't always what happens when you get a bite on a jerkbait. You're not always going to feel a slam, but I did. And it was like I had the rod like this, and I was trying to move the trolling motor back this way. And as I had the rod like this, I wasn't even really paying attention to that because I'm trying not to blow onto the rocks. Something goes woo and literally pulled my rod down. So out of reaction, I just locked my wrists and I loaded the rod up, and I had one. And I started reeling towards it, and then I'm trying to move the boat. It's a whole mess, right? It's a whole mess. It's fishing. You're a hot mess out there. Well, I start cranking towards him, and he's pulling. Now he's diving, so he's putting tension on it. And I was like, okay, so I kicked the boat out far enough to where I could fight the fish, and I kicked the boat out there, and I fight the fish. It takes a while to get him in because he's way out there, and I netted him. It was a good one. It was like 2 pounds, right? Well, the light bulb went off. I said, oh, okay, the only thing I did different, I've tried fast, I've tried slower, I've tried a couple different retrieves. I've made 4 or 5 casts. So I unhook him, I throw him in the live well, my cooler, I pump some water in there. And so I reel up, fire back out there, basically same exact cast, just way out there. I reel it to get it down a little bit. I reeled it. And as I was reeling it, I jerked a couple times, reel up the slack, jerked a couple times, boom, 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 reel up the slack, and then went like this and just sat there. And the wind's blowing a little bit, and I kicked the trolling motor over, and I'm watching my line, and all of a sudden I see a little, just a little, and I reel like this, and it loads me up, and I'm like, and it's a cookie cutter. I went on to catch a fish on about 7 or 8 straight casts like this. And this is a very slow process because you're not only fishing a slow jerkbait early, it's cold, but I'm pausing. And I'm talking, I was pausing for 15 to 30 seconds. And I had to. And it was strange because I'm still trying to figure out an efficient way. And yes, I got a few bites, but as fishermen, we want to cover water. So I fired out and I'm jerking this thing, I'm reeling, 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 jerking this thing, I'm reeling. And then I jerked this thing and I just stopped. About 30 seconds goes by. Boom. And I'm like, well, this is how I'm going to have to fish this thing all day. And I'm not going to argue with the fish. I don't know why they want it just sitting there. I went on to catch everything from 8 to 10-inch largemouth to almost 3-pound largemouth. And there's some big largemouth in here. That day, really, nobody caught any big ones. I did catch a 3.5-pounder on a football head after the sun came out. But I caught about a 22-inch rainbow trout. They do stock rainbow trout in there. And on the jerkbait, it was the same exact circumstance. And randomly, every 30 or 40 minutes, I'd cast out and just kind of try to work it fast and see if they were, getting more active or not. As the water's getting a little warmer, the sun was coming up, but the wind was still blowing like crazy. And it would not matter. I could do that halfway to the boat. And the first time that I stopped that thing for about 15 to 30 seconds, boom, they'd smoke it. And if they didn't hit it then, it was when I went to jerk it right after that, boom, they'd hit it right then. And I would hook them as I was jerking it. And I lost a few fish too, but I pretty much landed every single fish I caught. I had them all. I did really well. Would have won the tournament. Later on that day, they stopped biting the jerkbait. The sun came out, and they were hitting the football head jig. I caught another nice one to get rid of my smallest one that I had, and I had one in there that was about a pound and a half, and I was weighing them. When I fish tournaments, I weigh every fish unless I know for sure it's staying in there. I weigh every single fish as I catch them, and I label them. That way I can call easier. Now, it doesn't save me any time immediately, but it does save me time on the back end. So when I go to call, I catch one, I put a tag in it, and I weigh it with the tag. That way they're all the same weight, and I already have a tag in all the fish. So I weigh it with the tag in it, and if it goes, like in this instance, it went like 2.25, and I knew that I had one that was like 1.45 in my live well. And then I write it down or I put it in my phone. I looked at the number that said 1.45, and I'm like, okay, my third fish, my third keeper, 1.45. So I look in there, I grab the 3, and if you really want to look at it, you can pull a couple up. You grab the 3 and the 5, and they're supposed to be within a few ounces of each other. You look, and you're like, yep, 3 smallest. And I'd unhook them right away. I'd throw them out. When I went to do this, and I had already weighed the fish, as soon as I opened my cooler, and it's a split lid, as soon as I opened it, and he didn't have a tag in him because he was 3.5 pounds. He was easily the biggest fish that I caught all day, and I had caught a bunch up to that point. I probably caught 30 or 40 fish that day. This fish comes torpedoing out there and doesn't even land in the boat and give your boy a chance to keep him in the boat. He clears the side of the boat straight in the reservoir. He lands in the reservoir and he sits there for a second, and I'm like, and he's about 3 foot down and 2 feet out, and I can't reach him, not even with my net. And I'm holding this 2-pounder, and I'm like, I got the lid closed already. Like, he literally jumped through this little, and I'm looking at him, and he swam away all slow, like cocky. It's terrible. It's a terrible thing. But regardless, I had a really good tournament. It was on jerkbait. It was one of the most fun tournaments I ever had outside of losing a 3.5-pounder, because now I basically am keeping a 1.5-pounder and letting my 3.5-pounder go. And it was bad. And that was at the very end of the tournament. So I was culling within the last 15 minutes of the day. Went in. I knew that I had done some things right because big fish was just a little bit bigger or tied with my biggest, and I had two about that same size. And then I had some of the smaller ones, the ones at the pound range. But everybody else, even people that had a limit, said that they had only caught about 5 or 6 fish all day, and I had caught 30 or 40, including that 3.5 pounder that got out. So it was a good tournament. Thanks to this exact bait, the Bomber suspending long A. Very good bait. Once again, the body style difference, right? That body style difference. One's a little bit sharper. You know, you can kind of see it right there. But yeah, hopefully you guys are liking some of these videos I'm trying to put together. I know it's really low key. It's just me kind of chilling out. My shed is freezing cold right now. My little workshop. But yeah, I'm just chilling in the kitchen doing these videos. I have tons of stories. It's not all just tournament stories, but I think there's a lot to be learned from some of these different stories where you're practice fishing or you're fishing for tournaments. Have you? I don't even fish jerkbaits a lot, but those are two very distinct moments in my life when I learned a lot of different things about jerkbait fishing. And you can read it in a book, even though the fish don't read that book. You can read it in a book. You can read it in Bassmaster magazine. You can have a guy like me telling you on his camera or his phone about, oh yeah, once in a while you have to wait 15 seconds, and sometimes you don't. But I accidentally found that you do, and sometimes I do that even with plastic baits. I do that with jigs. Is I'll cast out. I'll make sure my line's taut, and I'll make sure my line's taut, and then I'll grab my drink. And I'll take a drink of my energy drink or my coffee, or I'll grab a bite of my sandwich, my granola bar, and I'll kind of put that in, and I'll just watch the line. It gives me an excuse to pause myself, you know, because as fishermen, especially if you're fishing tournaments or you're out first time in forever, maybe out with a good friend, family member, you're kind of juiced up, you're amped up, and you're fishing fast. Even if it's warm out, sometimes they don't want that. But this was a case in point that I accidentally found out that they wanted it paused, and nobody else that entire tournament. Everybody knows throw a jerkbait when it's cold, right? I got a whole box of them over here. You could have thrown any of them. I don't think any of them would have worked unless you were actually waiting that 15 to 30 seconds. And yes, that was a suspending model, but I wasn't using a floating, I wasn't using a sinking, but that fish needed to be able to ease up on it and take a look at it, and for whatever reason, then eat it. Nobody else in that tournament caught one fish using a jerkbait. And when I told them how I figured out how I was catching them, because I didn't catch them at all when I was moving it, unless it was after a very long pause or during that pause. That was it. They said they never tried that. And I go, well, I got lucky because I was adjusting my boat. And the part of it that's not luck is cluing that in, is tuning that in, is putting those pieces of the puzzle together. And that's one thing that I grew up on both sides of my family. Both of my grandfathers taught me about paying attention to where, what you were doing, how did the strike feel. Like when that guy hit that first jerk bait so hard, I knew those fish were actively feeding. But it was, why did it need to be paused? And it was during the pause. So I said, okay, that was an encouraging strike. It was a good fish, you know, for that body of water. So I'm just going to try to duplicate it. And I did up until the sun came out and the water slicked off. And then they were hitting the jig. So, well, I'll be trying to put out more videos like this, doing some instructional videos. You know, I will show how to rig some plastics, different knot tying and stuff like that. And we're talking about jerk baits today. Hopefully this wasn't too boring. If you want to continue on this fantastic voyage that I'm on, there is something I was reading, and I can't remember exactly what it is, but I'll put it in the description. It was a Bible verse about sharing your hobbies and sharing your passions with others, and that's what I'm trying to do. So I will catch you guys in another video. Hopefully you like it.